Tonight, a Conservative billionaire donor defects to Reform UK, pledging to raise enough money for them to win the next election. Nick Candy says he's in contact with Elon Musk. We speak to him and the leader, Nigel Farage, about what they say is a moment of political revolution and ongoing concerns about the past behaviour of a Reform MP. Also tonight, the leader of the rebels in Syria says the world has nothing to fear after the fall of Assad. But the Home Secretary tells us she is monitoring the impact on security and migration in the UK. The Chancellor announces a crackdown on government waste with what she calls efficiency savings of 5%, even as the government risks union anger over public sector pay. We'll also have a special report on how vulnerable people are being failed by the social care crisis. And the Person of the Year contest that sets Donald Trump against Elon Musk. Do either of them deserve it? We'll look back at how they compare with some of the more controversial selections of the past. Our duo, Ava Evans and Jonathan Gullis, are ready to make their pitch to be Panel of the Year. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Nick Candy, billionaire, husband to Neighbour star Holly Valance, now Treasurer of Reform UK. He's switched allegiance from the Conservative Party, promised to donate £1 million of his own money and raise another £40 million from other donors. Reform UK is getting serious. Now, we know what their aim is, even if they haven't said it in exactly these terms, to kill off the Conservative Party and become the nation's party of the right in their place. Well, Nick Candy said today he 100% believes that Nigel Farage will be our next Prime Minister. Now, Reform have only got 5 MPs, but they're surging in the polls, and today's financial backing is a big deal. Money matters in politics, and now Reform have got it. But if they want to be taken seriously as a party that could form a government in the future, well, increased scrutiny comes along with that, and rightly so. Reform might think they faced tough questions before, but as they professionalise and ask to be taken seriously as a party, that's only going to intensify. We're leading our show tonight with an interview with our political editor, Beth Rigby. She was speaking to Nigel Farage and Nick Candy. Let's take a listen.
Mr Candy, you were a Conservative Party member and donor from 2009 to now. Between 2020 and 2020, you donated £270,000 to the Conservatives. Do you intend to donate similar amounts to Reform before the general election, the next one?
No, I've mentioned this morning I will donate a 7-figure sum to Reform.
So over £1 million?
Over £1 million. And I will also raise Reform more money than it's ever been raised for a political party in this country.
And Elon Musk said on X, on the announcement of your appointment, that this was, quote, interesting.
Yes.
Are you going to try and raise funds from him? And have either of you had conversations with Elon Musk or his team about donations?
We've had no conversations yet regarding donations. Elon's obviously very close to President Trump. Nigel's also super close to President Trump. As you know, he helped, via my wife, do the largest Republican fundraiser ever done outside of America. If Elon wants to give and it can be given legally, then, of course, Reform would be very interested in that.
Because, Nigel Farage, there was talk about an £80 million donation from Elon Musk.
A Sunday newspaper story without any basis of fact. Now, let's be clear. Elon Musk is very supportive of what Reform is trying to do, supportive of me personally, and we've got good connections with him. Nick's got good connections with him as well.
He's messaged me this morning.
There you are. So
he's messaged you this morning?
Yeah, we're speaking, so probably later today.
What did he say?
I cannot discuss that.
Okay. But he messaged you directly?
So, yeah, we're speaking directly.
So he's giving us political support. We have, at this stage, neither solicited or been offered donations.
OK. Fundraising, Nick Candy has joined the party, a big coup for you, professionalisation of the party. You have talked about the need to professionalise. You've talked about having over 100,000 members. There were issues in the general election. You're on record saying you were dismayed by reprehensible, they're your words, racist comments from campaigners and homophobic comments by one of your members of staff. Did it hurt you in the campaign?
Hugely. Hugely. I mean, don't forget, I've been out of the picture for a couple of years. Reform was a very, very small party. Full credit to Richard Tice for keeping it going, but it wasn't really in a fit state to fight a snap general election. That's all changed. We are now vetting candidates for the English County Council elections, I'll bet you to a standard that no other party for local elections ever has done. That is happening. We're forming branches up and down the country. I've brought in an entrepreneurial chairman in the shape of Zia Youssef to set the thing on the right footing. I've now got a professional in to help us raise money. We are going places. In fact, I'll go further. I genuinely think we're at that moment where there could be a genuine political revolution in this country.
And Nigel Farage, you talk about cleaning up reform as a big part of what you're doing. You've just explained that. And I want to ask you about James McMurdoch, the Reform MP for South Basildon and East Thurrock. He was jailed in 2006 for assaulting his girlfriend. You have said the vetting wasn't as it should be. Under your plans for professionalisation, how would you deal with a case like Mr McMurdoch in the future?
Let's be clear, he went to a Young Offenders Institute, right?
For 21 days.
He was a teenager and he did something he shouldn't have done. He was out of control. He was out of control. That conviction is now spent.
Yes.
It is a spent conviction.
How would you deal with it in the future? That's my question.
That conviction is now spent. And from that very unpromising start in life, he went on, got himself qualified.
The point is, the question is...
No, you're not listening, you're not listening.
I am listening to you.
He went on...
All right,
he went on from that. He got qualified. He became a bond trader in the City of London. He's happily married with his 5th child on the way, and he's now become a Member of Parliament. If in a country that believes in Christian forgiveness, he is not a good example to young tearaways, I don't know what is.
And the question is how would you deal with that in the future? So if someone has a conviction for domestic violence or assault, if the conviction is spent, they can still be a councillor and member of the party.
Well, if we think they're good enough, if we think they've genuinely, you know, decided that the past was awful. Honestly, I tell you what, there are Young Offenders Institutes today full of people. If half of them turned out as well as James McMurdoch, we'd be a better country. Do you believe in Christian forgiveness?
Everyone believes in redemption. Everyone should have second chances.
Is he not a very good example?
Nigel, that is not the question I'm asking. What I'm saying is there is a discrepancy here between what the court documents said and what James has said.
Right. It is
that not
conviction.
an issue for constituents? That's the point, that there isn't transparency.
You go and knock on their doors. You go and knock on their doors. And I'll bet you, in that part of Essex...
He only won by 98 votes, and there might have been people, particularly women, that might have suffered domestic abuse or violence or assault that might be uncomfortable with that. Do you take the point?
No, I don't take the point, because I'll bet you there are many young tearaways right now in Basildon and elsewhere who are being sent off to Young Offenders Institutes who may well go on to lives of repetitive crime, maybe even violent crime. This is an example of a human being who's picked himself up from a terrible situation and made a big success of it.
But in terms of being a MP and representing constituents, my point here is not what happened. My point is that there is a discrepancy.
Right. Well, I haven't seen
I
it.
pushed
I believe
her
you.
over.
I believe you.
But
I haven't seen the discrepancy.
That's the court document.
It's a spent
well,
conviction,
what did he tell
end
you he'd
of
done?
conversation.
Well, what did he say he'd done
Spent conviction,
to you?
end of conversation.
His constituents...
I tell you what, we're busy, right? We're building a new political party. You are talking about a spent conviction from 20 years ago. What's happened is happened. Whether there are discrepancies or not, I don't know. What I know is he's a fine young man who's turned out really very, very well.
But for the victim,
he's a serving member of Parliament.
For him to imply that she was pushed over when the court document says he kicked her, that's difficult for the victim, isn't it?
I'll believe anything you say.
It's not what I say, it's what the court document says.
I haven't read
It's not what I said, it's a court
document. I don't know, it's 20 years ago. And this is why, and this is why, you know, mainstream media like you are losing the affections of the British public. Let's worry about where we are today. Let's worry about where the country's going. Let's worry about the fact we're getting poorer. Let's worry about the fact that our communities are breaking down, that people are scared to walk on the streets of London wearing a watch or jewellery.
No,
I know.
What
and
I'm
you're
asking
you're talking about an inside Westminster story that you want to talk about.
If you want to professionalise the party, then these are questions people are going to ask. And if it was another political party and this has happened, you would expect me to ask them as well.
I have not heard you ask a single Labour minister about the case where a man was on the ground in Runcorn a few weeks ago and punched 5 times on the ground.
Has he not been suspended for that?
Suspended.
I thought he had the whip suspended.
Still a Member of Parliament.
Have you? But you
Still a
didn't-
member of Parliament.
But he has had the whip suspended, and they are investigating it.
We'll see.
Whereas what you're saying here is that the court documents are irrelevant. So
I'm saying a spent conviction is irrelevant. You're quite right.
Nigel Farage and Nick Candy talking to Beth Rigby. Well, a little earlier, the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stryer, was asked about that defection of Nick Candy to Reform.
Look, people move around and there'll be new donors stepping forward. I was just at a reception last night for donors and the atmosphere there was extremely positive. Kemi gave a very powerful speech. Everybody was up for the fight and we have a long way to go to the next general election, but we're going to do the hard yards to make sure we're in the right position to be strong politically at that point.
Right, let's bring in a duo for the evening, shall we? Ava Evans, the political correspondent for Politics Joe, and the former Conservative MP, Jonathan Gullis. Great to have you both on the programme. Welcome to Politics Hub. First time, Ava. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Right, so reform. First, I think it's probably worth just reflecting on that interview that Beth did with Nigel Farage there, because you could see things getting a bit tense. Jonathan, what did you make of it?
Well, there is, I think, a valid point in the idea that someone has had a spent conviction and how long do we hold someone's past over their head? There's also something to be said about how do we allow the electorate to know of someone's past, particularly if there has been a criminal conviction, regardless maybe of how long ago that was, in order for there to be a clear picture. I think Nigel didn't help himself by having said that I think he sort of inferred along the lines that had he been there, maybe James wouldn't have been nominated or the whip would have been withdrawn. So that's kind of opened up, I think, that conversation. But the reality for reform is this is going to come. If they want to be the party government, not only are the individuals who are seeking elected office in their party, but the policies which are still very much missing in terms of detail and substance are going to come under further scrutiny too. And that is just going to be part and parcel of the game if you want to be the party of government. And so ultimately those are the challenges that they're going to have to overcome.
What do you think, Ava?
I thought that was really interesting because it sort of shows the beginning of their electoral strategy going forward and them closely aligning themselves with Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the sort of strategy that both of those used to win the American election recently. So, you heard Nigel there talking about distrust in mainstream media. Now, that is Donald Trump's big MO. It's Elon Musk's big MO as well. And also the way in which that he's defending his MP who has this spent conviction. First, he talks about a Christian forgiveness. That is a very American Donald Trump thing to do. And he also says pretty much it doesn't matter. Now, if you look at the sort of things that Donald Trump did during the election, he's got several allegations or even convictions against him for, some suggestions of harassment against women. He essentially said he didn't care. And he went on podcasts like Joe Rogan to tell young men that he didn't care. And that's why they still voted for him.
There's a bigger point as well, isn't there, about reform? Because, look, they've been polling pretty high. They've been leapfrogging some of the big parties in some polls as well. Now they've got this big money donation, which, let's be honest, matters an awful lot in politics. Is this almost existential for the Conservative Party? Could you see a world where reform become the main opposition to Labour and potentially into government? What do you think?
I think if the Conservative Party doesn't listen to the voters, a lot of whom did switch their vote to reform, and a lot of those who sat at home as well, then there is a very real threat for the Conservative Party going forward. Let's be frank. I think if you voted reform in the 2024 general election, you're likely to carry on. I don't think reform could pick off Conservative voters in the 2024 general election, but those are a lot of millions who sat at home, who would naturally lean Conservative. So the challenge for reform is how many of those can they pick up to come over? And then, of course, they are a very real threat to Labour. I would say in that red wall, traditional old-school Labour values, who are patriotic, who do care about security, who do care about borders, who also care about their communities. And I think there is a real distrust in the two-party system. The Conservative Party is daft to think at any moment that somehow the voters have forgiven and forgotten our past 14 years. They haven't. I've seen that on the doorsteps. There's still real anger that we have to overcome.
Yeah,
and Labour are now experiencing that as well. So Reform are sitting there nicely as we are the alternative. They haven't got to do much. They've just got to be not Labour and not Conservative. The challenge for Reform, I think, will be that Wales elections, the Scottish elections and further local elections will have to start producing a policy agenda. And does that chime with the voter base that they're talking to.
What's your sense on this?
I don't quite agree with you. I think the Conservatives are over, and I think the competition now at the next election will be Labour and Reform. And, you know, one way that Reform will do this is they speak to young people in a way that none of the legacy parties do. During the election, they were talking about things like bursaries for young people or cancelling student loans or getting people into housing in a way that the other parties just didn't bother getting on board with. And their strategy is to go online. And if you want to talk to young people, they're online.
It's interesting, though, because if you look at the polling, Reform have trumpeted how well they're doing among young people, but it's young men, right? It's not really young women. I mean, is that a problem for them?
No. Because, I mean, typically that age group doesn't come out to vote anyway. So if they can mobilise young men, that's much better than any of the other parties have managed to do.
Which is a bit of a move out the Trump playbook, right? Trump was picking up voters who traditionally didn't vote. So if Reform's able to gather systems to get data on those who maybe only voted, for example, in the 2016 referendum, normally sit out of general elections, but suddenly will come out for Reform to stamp a protest vote to make it clear they want to see the system ripped up. I don't think it's over. I think Kemi has a huge challenge on her hands, and I think that if Reform pick up 100+ councillors in next year's locals, if they pick up the mayoralty in Lincolnshire, if they then become the first or second largest party in Wales and pick up another 200-300 councillors in 2026, I think that's going to be a day of reckoning for the Conservative Party about how do you seriously deal with the threat. But Labour would be daft to overlook the threat the Reform posed them as well. As I say, if you look at seats like Stoke-on-Trent, they came second in Stoke-on-Trent Central. They came. I only beat them by 700. They came second in Stoke Central. Only £6,000 a Labour MP, Gareth Snell, and that was with a paper candidate who did no campaigning.
It's so interesting, really interesting chat. I'm going to be looking out for those young male voters, particularly those who perhaps haven't voted before. It's really interesting. Right, let's turn now, shall we, to the situation in Syria. And the man who led the rebel groups which overthrew President Assad has said that the rest of the world has no reason to fear what happened inside Syria and that the country will be rebuilt and move towards stability. He was speaking exclusively to our international news editor, Zain Jafar.
You're talking about a historic day of Syria to all the people here, but what's your message to foreign countries who are worried or concerned about what's happening in Syria at the moment? What's your thoughts on this and what's your message?
Their fears are unnecessary, God willing. The country will be rebuilt. The fear was from the presence of the regime. The country is moving towards development and reconstruction. It's going towards stability. People are exhausted from war. So the country isn't ready for another one, and it's not going to get into another one. The source of our fears was from the Iranian militias, Hezbollah and the regime which committed the massacres we are seeing today. So their removal is the solution for Syria. The current situation won't allow for a return to panic.
Well, despite those reassurances, the turmoil in Syria and its implications for immigration is causing concern to governments across Europe. Today, the Home Secretary hosted a meeting of the Calais Group, leaders from Belgium, France, Netherlands, the European Commission and its agencies, Europol and Frontex. Now, that group targets people smuggling operations across Northern Europe. And after that meeting, our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, sat down with Yvette Cooper.
Home Secretary, some people are warning about a heightened terror threat here in the UK because of what's happening in Syria. For example, ISIS fighters potentially fleeing Syrian camps. Is that something you're monitoring, concerned about?
Well, we discussed at the Calais Group here this morning the issues surrounding Syria and really the way in which events are unfolding very fast, and we still don't know how this is going to play out. Clearly, everyone is pleased to see the end of the Assad regime throughout, and clearly monitoring what happens.
Syrian asylum seekers are a really high proportion of small boat crossings. I think it was the third highest in the year to September. Can you be sure that that number won't go down? It could go up because we don't know what's going to happen in Syria.
Well, clearly, all of the action that we're taking across Europe and with our European partners is about preventing these dangerous boat crossings. No one should be making those dangerous boat crossings. They undermine our border security and put lives at risk. So clearly, we will be working with other European countries to prevent that and to go after the criminal gangs. In addition, we of course also need to monitor closely the instability in Syria. Currently, what we've seen is people trying to cross the border from Turkey back into Syria, and so people travelling in that direction. That's also why we have suspended asylum decisions in the UK for Syrian cases, because, of course, people were claiming asylum from the Assad regime, which is no longer there. So that's why it's right, like France and Germany, for us to suspend those asylum decisions. But we also need to closely monitor what is happening in Syria, because there's so much instability. We don't know yet how that will play out or what that will mean.
And we're not going to go any further with those. We've paused decisions. Are we going to go the direction of Austria and potentially deport people back to Syria?
Well, this was an issue we discussed at the Calais group this morning, where Germany, France, the Belgium and the Netherlands and ourselves have all paused asylum decisions because people were claiming against the Assad regime. They were claiming asylum from the Assad regime. That is no longer in place. So it would not be appropriate for us to be taking those asylum decisions, but we don't yet know how things are going to play out. We will need new guidance for Syria for making those asylum decisions, but we need to monitor what happens at the moment so that we can make for progress going forwards.
Well, our social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson has also been speaking to a Syrian asylum seeker here in the UK about his fears about returning to a country where he was attacked as a human rights activist.
It is not ended by Bashar al-Assad leaving Syria, because all the officers, all the soldiers, all the security officers that have been controlling the country, all the Ba'ath party who was controlling the party were still, and still now, fully functioned and fully armed. I think that there is a lot of revenge killing will happen.
Well, Ali Fortescue joins us now live. And Ali, you obviously sat down exclusively with the Home Secretary today. What was your sort of takeaway from the interview?
My big takeaway, I think, was that this is obviously a moment of grave importance and a moment that you could see from her, she knows could go either way. Either, and this is on immigration, either, I guess, that kind of pressure valve that was in some way opened when the civil war broke out in Syria, millions of people fled the country. Could that be closed now? She was talking about people going back to Syria from Turkey. Or will we enter a period of instability, uncertainty? Worse, could we see many more people coming to the UK fleeing Syria? And how will they do that? We know that asylum decisions have been paused. As I was saying in my interview, we know that the top three country, it's the third country that people coming on small boats say that they come from. So this has massive implications. As she put it, I think from one sentence to the next, the Home Secretary said there's potential opportunity, and then she said there's potential instability. Which of those kind of potentials is realised obviously matters massively for people in Syria, but I think is going to matter for her as Home Secretary here as well.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. Ali Fortescue speaking to us there. Well, the fallout from the situation in Syria is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the political journalist Zoe Grunwald. Right, let's chat again to Ava and Jonathan, shall we? Ava, what's your take on this? Because, look, they paused decisions on asylum applications from Syria for now. But at the same time, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. You know, you could say that, look, Assad's gone, it's safe for those people who were claiming asylum from him. Or you could also say, look at the instability there, we need to make sure that people are safe.
Well, they're now in the tricky position of not knowing whether those people might have worked with Assad as, torturers. They don't know if they were being persecuted by Assad or whether they were on the side of Assad. And so there's got to be the sort of, going back to the drawing board and working out who's who. But the problem is you've got about 6,000 people who are waiting now to have their asylum claim heard. And Labour have been very clear about wanting to clear this backlog and they want to have empty sheets all the time. And this is only going to delay them.
What's your take on it?
I would first of all question the legality of being able to pause. Whilst it's something that I would welcome, I suspect it could be quite easily legally challenged. And, this could be something that we see all the way up to the European Court of Human Rights. And how will Labour interact with that if that is legally challenged? Secondly, I totally agree with Ava that how do you define who's coming over here? Are they genuine asylum seekers or are these people who have actually been part of the Assad regime? Even some of those who have been part of the now new leadership, but obviously a proscribed terrorist organisation as far as this country is concerned. And then you've got the question, I would say, that no one really talks about in international affairs, Turkey. Turkey has its fingerprints all over this rebel organisation in terms of helping them overthrow Assad. And obviously, again, a proscribed terrorist organisation, the same way that we know that they've got assistance in other parts of the Middle East, whilst also being a member of NATO, whilst also being a friend of the Kremlin. I feel like there's an awful lot going on with Turkey that isn't really being looked at and explored. And actually, is Turkey really an ally in NATO? Is it really a friend of the Western civilization when it comes to defending against these type of groups? Or, as you know, we saw with the Kurds in the past, when it came to Iraq, they were quite clear about not letting those people escape, obviously, the Saddam Hussein regime. So I think there's an awful lot. But I was quite disturbed by Labour yesterday, who seemed to be all over the place initially on what the position was on this proscribed terrorist group, what was the position on suspending asylum claims, what was the position in terms of whether or not we welcome the fall of the Assad regime. I just thought it's quite messy and clumsy again in something that I would have thought was pretty basic in understanding how to deal with.
The comms were very much all over the place yesterday, and also now Labour found themselves in the tricky position of, you know, what humanitarian aid do you now supply to rebuilding Aleppo? Because it's always been a big issue for Labour, Syria. They've always been anti-bombing Syria in the way that, not to be rude, but you guys campaigned for. So they've now got to start spending.
Thanks both very much indeed. Messy, it feels, it really does, and very, very volatile as well. Thank you both indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the Chancellor promises efficiency savings in government spending, but denies we're heading back to austerity. Is that credible? I'll speak to Paul Johnson from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And the Princess of Wales and Elon Musk are among those shortlisted for Time magazine's Person of the Year award, but is a second victory for Donald Trump on the cards?
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent.
You are not getting in this elevator, okay?
The judge made it very clear that she could see no justifiable reason why Socoulas wasn't here facing British justice.
I promised I would get him justice.
Free, wherever you get your news. This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? This is the exact spot in Nottingham where their 19-year-old son, Barnaby Webber, lost his life.
I just think it's so cruel and so harsh.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
Sky News gets the full story first. Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. It's legal to let go. Set the speed and take the hands off. It's almost driverless, but not quite. Hans is a highly trained police dog. The force is incredible. It's really frightening, actually. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the Chancellor has started the countdown to her first spending review in office. Rachel Reeves today promised to find what she called efficiency savings of up to 5% across government spending. Now, she denied that her plans are a return to austerity and said she's instead trying to cut out any waste.
I have no doubt that we can find efficiency savings within government spending of 5%, and I'm determined to do so, because it's through finding those efficiency savings that we'll have the money to spend on the priorities of the British people. So part of this spending review will be cracking down on waste, cracking down on non-priority spending, so that we can focus on the issues, whether that's improving living standards, ensuring our streets are safe, or indeed reducing waiting times in the NHS. Those are the people's priorities, and that's what we'll be focusing on in the spending review.
Well, the Chancellor was speaking on the same day that it emerged ministers are proposing a pay deal for millions of teachers and nurses that was only a fraction above the rate of inflation. We can speak now to Paul Johnson, the Director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Great to have you on the programme as always. So, Rachel Reid said she wants to find efficiency savings. Can you just explain the difference between efficiency savings and budget cuts?
Most organisations want efficiency savings. They will go to their department or their sub-organisation and say, your budget's going to be 5% less, tell us how you're going to do it, and then they'll give them a budget 5% less. The problem with government is that doesn't tend to work or doesn't tend to happen. So the efficiency savings will not, I think, come with cuts. What they'll be trying to do is to say to the Department of Health or the Department of Education, or whoever it is, what would you cut, and then we'll give you some more money to do other things or to do things better. So it can be very difficult to tell where you've actually got efficiency savings, where you've got where you've got cuts, where you've got money being shifted around. I mean, we can all see in the public services we use that these things could be made more efficient, but driving that change from Whitehall is genuinely hard if you're not willing simply to say you're going to cut the budgets.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say that there are things that public services could do more productively, more efficiently, but at the same time, you know, what kind of things realistically could they look for? Do you think 5% of efficiency savings is going to end up hurting public services?
Well, it depends how it's done. I mean, it's if we could get the same output for 5% less input, that of course would be brilliant. And bit by bit across your individual hospitals or individual courts or what have you, there are probably ways of doing that. But as I say, driving that from Whitehall is difficult. If what this actually means, I'm sure it isn't what it means, but if it were to be what it meant, 5% cut in spending, then yes, of course you would end up with less good services, at least for a period of time. What you need is a long period of sustained focus on getting things more efficient, but Whitehall has not been very good at achieving that.
I want to talk to you about public sector pay, because we've learnt that ministers have recommended a 2.8% pay rise for teachers, nurses, other public sector workers as well, so only just above inflation. Do you think it's the right ballpark, or do you think that's going to be a bit of a squeeze?
I think given everything, it's probably not a bad ballpark figure. The public spending so this is for next year. Public spending next year is due to rise by about 2.5%. On average this year and next, it's rising by just over 3%. So giving public sector workers just under 3% within that feels just about affordable, given all the things that the government wants to do. Now, public sector got 5.5% or so this year, which is fairly much in line with the private sector. 2.8% next year, again, will be fairly much in line, probably a little bit, as you say, above inflation. So all of that seems like a reasonable trade-off. Now, the downside is that public sector workers did lose out between 2019 and now, and they lost out between 2010 and now as well. So what I think the unions will be upset about is that's not making up any of the gap that has opened up. But given the constraints facing the Chancellor, I think it's pretty hard to argue for more for public sector pay when public services, as we've just been discussing, are under real strain.
Now, I keep coming back to some of the quotes that you gave and some of the things that you said during the election campaign. You know, we've obviously seen tax rises, we've seen efficiency savings, we've seen the kind of difficult decisions that this government keeps talking about. And before the election, you were saying that, look, in that campaign, Labour was avoiding difficult decisions. You said you can't avoid other choices simply by assuming growth will happen. Now, I know you're not exactly the kind of guy to do a kind of victory lap on TV, but do you think you've been proven right?
Well, look, it was obvious beforehand, before the election, that taxes were going to have to raise if cuts were going to be avoided. I mean, that was just obvious. And it was really sort of upsetting that none of the main parties would admit that. They were all far too scared to tell us that taxes would have to rise if public service spending wasn't going to have to be cut. And we called it a conspiracy of silence. And very, very sadly, I mean, that has proven to be the case. But as I say, it really wasn't. There really wasn't any doubt about it. I mean, the numbers that the election campaign was fought on were numbers that implied big cuts in public spending, because no one was willing to talk about the tax rises that would have to take place to avoid that.
Now, we're out of time for the interview, but there's one very quick question that I wanted to kind of squeeze in. It's something I've been wondering about. You know, if you were sort of Chancellor for a day, what reform would you push through?
Oh gosh, what? I mean, there's lots of reforms to the tax system, reforms to housing tax, stamp duty, council tax, and things like that. I wouldn't have increased employer national insurance contributions. I would either have undone the cut to employee contributions we had last year, just get us back to where we were a year ago, or possibly even put up income tax. But then I wouldn't necessarily being looked to get elected. I mean, the other thing I say is that one good thing this government is doing, it needs to go further, is really trying to sort out the planning regime and get more houses built. Now, I actually don't think what they're doing is likely to be radical enough to achieve what they want to do, but they're definitely on the right track on that one. And that would also be, you know, very close to the top of my agenda.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul Johnson there of the IFS. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we're going to get reaction to that from our panel. Plus, a Sky News special report into one family's call for answers over a social care system at breaking point. Welcome back. Now, before the break, we were hearing from Paul Johnson at the IFS about government efficiency savings and also public sector pay deals. Let's get the thought now of Ava and Jonathan, shall we? Ava, just let's talk about the public sector pay, shall we? And Paul Johnson seemed to think it was a kind of reasonable ballpark, but we have heard some backlash from the unions. What's your view?
Yes, the Royal College of Nursing, they've said that they've essentially called it offensive. And then the National Education Union as well, they are pretty upset with it. And I think what the problem is, which is sort of what Paul was touching on there, is we sort of had this huge radical rhetoric from Labour when they first won the election. And then we've had subsequent months of underwhelming policy. So we were told that we were going to have these big, brand new, spanking, wonderful public services that just haven't materialised. And actually, Labour have some really good policies, particularly when it comes to education, things like early breakfast programmes. But where are they? Or this toothbrushing programme that they spoke about, brilliant, where is it? And instead, you're focusing on these sort of very minimal pay increases rather than actually the kind of holistic approach to education that we were first promised.
Yeah, what's your take on public sector pay?
I think ultimately, look, Rachel Reeves is in a tight spot. Whoever was going to be Chancellor, there were going to be limited funds. I think they were smart to take independent public sector pay body reviews away, because ultimately, whatever they come out with, you're essentially going to have to eventually politically bow down to the pressure. But I also think Rachel's not helped herself by essentially front-loading the budget for the first 2 years, what I call the sugar hits, in terms of mass spending. And then ultimately there's going to be budget restraints, even it's inferred cuts to certain departments in the remaining 3 years that's going to put huge pressure on those budgets. And I do agree, again, with Ava on education. Whilst I don't support, there's certain policies I definitely don't support, but on the free breakfast clubs, on the toothbrushing, why is that not front and centre to explain to people this money is going on this project and this is going to benefit in some way? And there just seems a really bad storytelling narrative to explain to the public where those increased taxes are going to go, where that increased borrowing is going to go, and why public sector workers might need to just swallow a bitter pill for the overall benefit of the wider country.
It's interesting, isn't it, the storytelling point? Do you think that there is something in that, Ava? Like, people perhaps are willing to pay taxes, but they need to know where they're going, or that it's worth doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, their time is running out for how much longer they can complain about what the Conservatives spent while they were in office. So today, Rachel Reeves was talking about, I'm going to find, departments will find new money. She was asked for an example, and she said, well, we won't be handing out COVID contracts. It's like, OK, we've heard that. Where's the next lot coming from? My colleague, Laura Beveridge, she FOI'd the Ministry of Justice earlier this year, and she found out that they were spending £7 million per financial year on press officers. That would be a really good example of potential cost saving that you could do, rather than, completely going over and over what the Conservatives did wrong.
Can I ask about Kemi? Because we've been talking about reform on the programme, the threat to the Conservatives. We're talking about Labour, who, they're in government, which means they're getting out there and doing anything. Do you feel that the Conservatives are really kind of on the pitch at the minute?
I think Kemi's got the benefit of time, in the sense of being able to reflect and look at where we went wrong and then come up with ideas. And I think she's going to have to come up with some very bold, very radical ideas to, one, grab the attention of the voters, and two, then convince them that it's believable and it's deliverable in order to get cut through. Because, as I say, you've got the insurgency of reform, you've got Labour in government with the benefit of the government machinery and able to actually do things. And as I say all the time, whilst it might feel a good time for the Conservatives, because I think Labour has had an appalling start to their time in office personally in terms of what they've chosen to do on certain things, but more importantly, I think the public are just not buying what they're selling fully. There's still 3-4 years away. I think May 2028 is my guess we'll have an election. But even by then, the economy could have started to turn a corner or turned a corner. The NHS may well be working as Labour intended, and therefore the electorate will move their opinion in terms of saying, no, this is good and we want more of this to come. So I think that there should be a bit of reflection of time, but I don't think you can vacate the field for too long.
OK, thanks both very much indeed, Ava and Jonathan there. Now, just imagine the concern of discovering that a vulnerable relative is missing. That's exactly what happened to Ben and his brother Simon, who's autistic and he can't be left alone. Simon's council-appointed carer just left him to wander the streets of London unsupervised. Sky's People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has been examining what this story tells us about the state of social care in the UK.
Hang on. You want to look right?
Simon is autistic and needs constant supervision.
Oh, bigger brother. Yeah.
He's not aware of danger. He's not aware of things that might harm him.
Oh, no. Oh, see, he just goes in and out. It's very easy for him to get lost and get into some trouble.
In May, Simon was taken into town by his carer, but the carer left him alone in a coffee shop while he went to the toilet, and Simon wandered off. The carer called Ben in a panic.
Hello? Hello, Ben. Yeah. I have an issue now. What happened? I went to the loo in the Starbucks. I asked them to sit down, I should wait for them coming. When I got out, I didn't see him. I've searched everywhere now. You went to the bathroom? Okay. He left? Yes.
When he was lost, if you can see through his eyes, it was sensory overload. The council and the social workers apologized. She said, "Oh, we're sorry, we'll have to do a safeguarding review." I said, "Please do the safeguarding review as soon as possible." She has been radio silent ever since.
The carer was supplied by a company called Hartwig Care. They refused to comment on the incident but said safety of clients was paramount. While Camden Council, who paid for the service, told us, "We would like to apologise to the resident and their family for the distress that this incident caused. Following this happening, we immediately began a safeguarding review with Hartwig to understand exactly what had happened and what they would do to ensure an incident like this does not happen in the future." How has this made you feel about the quality of care that was offered to you?
It just speaks to the greater issue about care in this country. Leave the lunch here for you.
Social care is at breaking point. 81% of councils, including Camden, say they expect to overspend on their adult social care budgets this year, while half of home care providers say they simply can't meet demand. And complaints about adult social care have risen by a fifth since 2013. All of these pressures can affect the quality of care. The government is promising vital social care reform, but we don't know when that will happen or how much it will cost.
When we won the general election on the 4th of July, we inherited the worst fiscal environment since the Second World War. And so action had to be taken to get the public finances onto a stable footing.
This government doesn't have the money to pull off what you've just told those people, does it?
Look,
there is no money to match the ambition, is it? You're going to level with people.
We are fixing the finances. Until we fixed the public finances, we are not going to be in a position to invest properly in our public services. So we've got to take it one step at a time.
Terrific. You know, I was worried about you last time.
Ben's brother's case was investigated, but he hasn't set eyes on the final report. And Camden Council told us it wasn't published online because the incident wasn't serious enough.
You're only one family emergency away from being a carer. Until you're in it, you can't really relate to it. But once you're in it, you'll understand.
Ben is now caring for his brother full-time again. He says his faith in the care system has been shaken so much that for now, they've opted to go it alone. Nick Martin, Sky News.
Nick Martin reporting for us there. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Well, it's that time of year again. Time magazine has revealed the shortlist for its Person of the Year award. Who do you think should win it?
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, despite warm words from the new regime, is Syria really safe for refugees to return to? And what about those left in limbo in the UK's asylum system? Plus, is a social care system stretched to breaking point, putting lives at risk? All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
Enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield
is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first. Hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Hello and welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the Time Person of the Year has been awarded annually for nearly 100 years, with Charles Lindbergh the first recipient in 1927 for his solo flight across the Atlantic. Of course, back then, though, it was just Man of the Year. In fact, it was all the way up to 1999, which says quite a lot. Rarely, though, a year goes by without some kind of controversy about who gets it. And if you have a look at this year's nominees, then I have to say it's unlikely to be any different. Just have a look at some of the nominees for Person of the Year. We've got actually previously won in 2021 alongside President Biden. Also nominated this year is the Princess of Wales and Mexico's first ever female president, Claudia Sheinbaum, as well. Also making it onto the list, Yulia Navalny, the Russian economist, wife of the country's leading dissident Alexei Navalny, who died in February. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and also Jerome Powell, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve. They also have a spot on the nominee list. And rounding out the nominees, some names familiar to anyone following the US election. Here we go. Podcaster Joe Rogan, President-elect Donald Trump, his right-hand man Elon Musk, and, of course, another familiar face as well, the Meta chief executive, Mark Zuckerberg. He's already won it, actually, in 2010. Now, we're going to discuss with our panel who they think should win this year. But first, let's take a trip back in time to see some of the others who won since 1945. Right, let's bring in Ava and Jonathan. What do you make of this year's crop, then, of nominees, Ava?
It's controversial, isn't it?
It's pretty controversial.
And it's also just sort of reminds you how much has gone on this year. There's been a lot happening, hasn't it? You know, I would have to say, though, I'd go probably for Elon Musk, personally. I think
he should win this year?
He's just been everywhere. I mean, buying a social media network and essentially engineering it so that your political persuasions will be at, the top of everyone's feeds for the moment they wake up every morning. I think it's such an extraordinary thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I remember back at the time, everyone was like, why has Elon Musk bought Twitter? It's like, all right, now it makes sense. This is why. This makes sense. Who would you go for?
So I'm a massive royalist, so selfishly I want the Princess of Wales, but I think ultimately it's got to be Donald Trump. I personally think it is the comeback of all comebacks, and the way and the manner in which he won, again, winning the popular vote, winning the Electoral College, winning the House, winning the Senate. I think it is something that is quite rare in politics. I think one of the best election results for the Republican Party in, 30-odd years, and one of the worst for the Democrats as well. So I think Donald Trump will probably be, in my mind, the rightful deserving winner. But I think Elon Musk is fascinating. I am not as sceptical in believing that he is deliberately trying to push his own political agenda. I must say, from the comments I get, even whilst I've been on your show, the left in this country is still very much able to access and explain their
sorry
views.
about those.
So, I would say that there's fair game on both sides. But I think it's true to say that Elon Musk plays big. I think Joe Rogan's interesting, by the way. I think it's a challenge, actually, genuinely, for what is dubbed legacy media. I think podcasters, Ava does it with Politics Joe. I think that is a really powerful thing that is going to be building and building. And I think ultimately we've seen the power of it in America. I think Barron Trump was allegedly the one pushing Donald Trump to go on those. And I think maybe we'll see our British politicians braving to go and have those 2-hour long conversations on those podcasts. And I think Joe Rogan is sort of the face of that movement, as it were. As it were.
Kamala Harris, why is she on there?
Well, I suppose she was rather prolific, wasn't she? She was having her brat election season or something like that. You know, can I actually change my answer? And can I go for the guy who attempted to assassinate Trump just before the American election?
Oh.
The guy who sliced his ear.
Talk about controversial.
But if we're talking about, you know, people who sort of defined an era or defined an epoch, I mean, that was a real change, wasn't it, in the way that the election was going and the way people felt about Donald Trump. There was a real surge for him after that.
I mean, that photo will be iconic.
It will, yeah.
And, you know, if he wins, I suspect that will be the photo that will be used on the front page.
Well, Hitler and Putin have both won before and been nominated, so there you go. There's definitely, you know, controversy previous in there as well. I would go for Giselle Pelicot, personally. The woman who's kind of become, you know, really...
Sensational,
becoming sensational because of the way she's acted throughout that French rape trial. I feel that's been like a kind of defining moment of our time as well. Right, crystal ball, who's going to win 2025?
I think Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump will win it.
Donald Trump.
Yeah, Trump.
Trump again. So there you go. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have your analysis on the programme tonight. We really appreciate it a lot. Well, that is it from us tonight. It's been another busy show discussing the rise of reform and, of course, reflecting on what that time person of the year is going to be. It says an awful lot, I think, about where our politics is at the minute in a world that feels increasingly volatile. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you have The World with Yalda Hakeem, which is going to be looking at the very latest on the Syrian war.